The autumn leaves fell like whispered confessions across the marble headstone as Marcus Whitfield dropped to his knees in the soft grass. His tailored suit, worth more than most people's monthly salary, pressed into the damp earth without hesitation. His bodyguards stood at a respectful distance near the black armored SUV, their eyes scanning the perimeter of Oakwood Memorial Cemetery, while their boss did what he came here to do every single year on this date. He wept. The most powerful black businessman in America, the man whose face had graced the covers of Forbes and Time and every financial magazine that mattered, pressed his forehead against cold stone and sobbed like the broken father he had been for 15 long years. The name carved into that marble read Zoe Lorraine Whitfield, and beneath it were the words that had haunted his dreams since the night the police knocked on his door. Beloved daughter. Forever 7. But what Marcus Whitfield did not know, what he could not possibly have known as his tears fell onto the grave of the child he believed he had buried, was that 60 feet away, hidden behind the thick trunk of an ancient oak tree, a 22-year-old woman with his exact same eyes was watching him. Her hands trembled against the rough bark. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain the bodyguards would hear it. And the question that had consumed her entire adult life finally had an answer she was not sure she was ready to accept. If this story is already gripping your heart, take a moment to subscribe to Acts of Depth and hit that notification bell. When you like and share these stories, you help bring more moments of truth, redemption, and justice into the world. Now, let me take you back 15 years to the night that shattered one man's world and created a mystery that would span more than a decade. Marcus Whitfield had not always been a billionaire. He had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in southeast Atlanta, the youngest of 4 children born to a nurse and a postal worker who believed that hard work and education were the only tickets out of poverty. His mother worked double shifts at Grady Memorial Hospital while his father walked his mail route in rain and shine and snow, and together they saved every spare penny for their children's futures. Marcus had inherited their work ethic and multiplied it by a factor his parents could never have imagined. He earned a scholarship to Georgia Tech, graduated top of his class in computer engineering, and started his first company in a garage with $3,000 he had saved from summer jobs. That company became Whitfield Technologies. Within 10 years, it had revolutionized data security for financial institutions. Within 15 years, Marcus had expanded into real estate development, renewable energy, and telecommunications. By the time he was 35 years old, he was worth more than $2 billion and showed no signs of slowing down. But money had never been the point. Money was just the tool Marcus used to build the life he actually wanted. And that life had a center that glowed brighter than any profit margin or stock valuation. Her name was Lorraine. He met her at a charity gala when he was 28 years old, and she was a pediatric resident at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. She wore a deep blue dress that matched her laugh, warm and enveloping, and completely unimpressed by his net worth. When he tried to make conversation about his business ventures, she steered the discussion toward childhood vaccination rates in developing nations. When he offered to make a donation in her name, she told him the money would be better spent on her hospital's music therapy program. She challenged him in ways no one else dared to, and within 6 months, he knew he would spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of her. They married on a spring afternoon in her grandmother's backyard in Savannah, surrounded by family and friends who ate homemade peach cobbler and danced until the fireflies came out. And 2 years later, Lorraine placed a tiny bundle in Marcus's arms and watched his entire world rearrange itself around the weight of his newborn daughter. Zoe Lorraine Whitfield was born with her mother's smile and her father's determination. Even as an infant, she seemed to study the world with an intensity that suggested she was already making plans for how to improve it. She spoke her first word at 9 months, took her first steps at 11, and by the time she was 3, she was asking questions about how airplanes stayed in the sky and why the ocean was salty. Marcus had thought he understood love before Zoe was born. He had been wrong. The love he felt for his daughter was something else entirely, something that rewired his brain and restructured his priorities and made every business success feel hollow unless he could come home and tell her about it. He recorded himself reading bedtime stories so Zoe could hear his voice when he traveled for work. He missed exactly one of her birthday parties in 7 years, and he still considered it the greatest failure of his life. Then came the night that ended everything. Lorraine and Zoe were driving home from a piano recital when a drunk driver ran a red light at 60 miles per hour. The impact was so severe that the responding officers initially believed there were no survivors. Lorraine died at the scene, her body shielding Zoe's car seat in a final act of maternal protection that doctors said was purely instinctive. But Zoe, little 7-year-old Zoe with her father's eyes and her mother's laugh, was rushed to the emergency room with injuries so extensive that the surgeons worked for 11 hours trying to save her. Marcus received the call while he was in a board meeting in New York City. He chartered a private jet and broke every speed limit between the airport and the hospital, but by the time he arrived, the doctors were waiting for him with the words that would define the rest of his life. "We did everything we could. I'm so sorry." He buried them together, mother and daughter, in matching plots at Oakwood Memorial Cemetery beneath an oak tree that Lorraine had once said reminded her of the one in her grandmother's yard. Marcus stood at that graveside in a black suit and watched 2 caskets descend into the earth, and something inside him descended with them. He continued to run his company. He continued to make money and expand his empire and appear on magazine covers with carefully constructed smiles. But the man who had once believed that hard work could solve any problem learned that there were some problems that no amount of money could touch. Grief had no price tag. Loss could not be negotiated, and the silence in his mansion was louder than any boardroom had ever been. For 15 years, Marcus Whitfield lived in that silence. He visited the graves every Sunday morning and on every anniversary of the accident. He funded a children's hospital wing in Lorraine's name and a scholarship program in Zoe's. He dated occasionally, at the insistence of friends who worried about his isolation, but no connection ever progressed beyond a few dinners. How could it? How could he give his heart to anyone when the largest piece of it was buried beneath that marble headstone? He had accepted, with the weary resignation of someone who has fought grief and lost, that the rest of his life would be an exercise in going through the motions until he could finally join his family again. But 800 miles away, in a small town in North Carolina that Marcus Whitfield had never heard of, a young woman named Amara Johnson was about to discover that everything she believed about her life was a lie. Amara had grown up believing she was an orphan. Her Aunt Gloria, the woman who raised her, told her that her parents had died in a house fire when she was 7 years old, that Gloria had been the only family willing to take her in, and that she should be grateful for the roof over her head and the food on her table. Gloria was not a warm woman. She worked as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company and lived in a modest house at the end of a quiet street, and she raised Amara with a combination of strict discipline and emotional distance that left the girl perpetually hungry for affection she never received. Amara learned early not to ask too many questions about her past. The one time she had pressed Gloria for details about her parents, asking if there were photographs or keepsakes she could see, Gloria's face had gone pale and her voice had turned sharp. "The past is dead," she said. "There's no point digging up graves." But the past, as Amara would learn, has a way of refusing to stay buried. It started with a college application. Amara was 21 years old and applying to graduate school in journalism when she needed her birth certificate for verification purposes. Gloria had always handled the paperwork, always kept important documents locked in a filing cabinet in her bedroom, but Gloria was away on a business trip, and the deadline was approaching. Amara found the key hidden in a jewelry box and opened the cabinet, expecting to find nothing more than the routine paperwork of a mundane life. What she found instead was a folder that made her knees buckle. Inside were newspaper clippings from 15 years ago. headlines about a tragic car accident that had claimed the lives of a prominent businessman's wife and daughter. There were photographs of a woman named Lorraine Whitfield, and Amara felt her breath catch in her throat because she was looking at her own face, 20 years older. There were legal documents with names that had been carefully altered, hospital records that did not match the story Gloria had told her. And there was a photograph of a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with braids and a gap-toothed smile, wearing a necklace with a small gold pendant shaped like a heart. Amara's hand moved to her own chest, where that same pendant still hung on a chain she had worn for as long as she could remember. Gloria had told her it was a gift from her birth mother, one of the few items salvaged from the fire. But there had been no fire. There had been no orphaned child grateful for rescue. There had been a 7-year-old girl named Zoe Whitfield, who survived a car accident that everyone believed had killed her. And somehow, impossibly, that girl had ended up in a small town in North Carolina being raised under a different name by a woman who had lied to her for 15 years. The investigation that followed took Amara 6 months and cost her everything she thought she knew about herself. She hired a private detective with money she had saved from her part-time job at the campus library. She obtained her real birth certificate through legal channels that revealed Gloria Johnson was not her aunt at all, but a former hospital employee who had been fired from the same emergency room where Zoe Whitfield was treated the night of the accident. She pieced together a story so horrific that there were days she could barely function, days when she sat in her small apartment and stared at the wall and tried to understand how the woman who raised her could have done something so monstrous. Gloria had been working as an administrative assistant in the ER that night. She had access to patient records, to the chaos of a major trauma case, to the moment when doctors stepped away from a child they believed was beyond saving. But Zoe had not died on that table. She had stabilized just enough to be transferred to the ICU, and in the confusion of that transfer, in the grief-stricken haze of a hospital dealing with a high-profile tragedy, Gloria had seen an opportunity. She had taken a child. She had forged documents, changed names, relocated to another state, and built a lie so complete that it had fooled everyone for 15 years. The question of why haunted Amara almost as much as the truth itself. The private detective eventually uncovered the answer in a series of old emails Gloria had failed to completely delete. Gloria Johnson had once been Gloria Whitfield, a distant cousin of Marcus's father who had been cut off from the family years ago after a dispute over money. She had applied to work at Whitfield Technologies and been rejected. She had written letters to Marcus asking for financial help and been ignored by assistants who never forwarded them. In her twisted mind, taking Zoe was an act of revenge against a family she believed had wronged her, a way to make Marcus Whitfield feel a fraction of the rejection and loss that she had felt her entire life. She had not taken Zoe for love. She had taken her as a punishment, and she had raised her with cold efficiency, never letting her get too close, never letting her feel truly wanted, because Zoe was never meant to be a daughter. She was meant to be a constant, living reminder of what Gloria had taken from the man who had ignored her. Amara spent 3 weeks after learning the full truth in a state of paralysis. She knew she needed to come forward. She knew that somewhere in Atlanta, a father was grieving for a daughter who was not dead. But the fear was overwhelming. What if he did not believe her? What if he had moved on, built a new life, and wanted nothing to do with the ghost of a child he had buried 15 years ago? What if she walked up to Marcus Whitfield and introduced herself as his daughter, only to be rejected by the only real family she had left? The risk felt insurmountable until she remembered something she had read in one of the old newspaper articles. Marcus Whitfield visited his family's graves every Sunday morning without fail. He had done so for 15 years. He had never stopped grieving. He had never let go. That was how Amara found herself hiding behind an oak tree at Oakwood Memorial Cemetery on a golden October morning, watching a billionaire weep at a grave that bore her birth name. She watched him for nearly 20 minutes, her own tears streaming silently down her face as she witnessed a grief so profound it seemed to bend the air around him. His bodyguards maintained their distance, clearly accustomed to these visits, clearly trained to give their employer privacy in his pain. When Marcus finally stood, brushing the grass from his knees with trembling hands, Amara felt her heart lurch. He was leaving. He was walking back to his armored SUV, and if she did not act now, she might lose her courage forever. Her feet moved before her mind could stop them. She stepped out from behind the tree and walked toward the grave, her path calculated to intersect with his before he reached the car. One of the bodyguards saw her first, his hand moving toward his jacket in a reflexive motion that suggested concealed protection. But Marcus raised a hand to stop him, his eyes fixed on the young woman approaching with a face that made his blood turn to ice. She looked exactly like Lorraine. Not similar, not reminiscent, but exactly like her. The same eyes, the same cheekbones, the same way of holding her shoulders. It was as if his wife had stepped out of his memories and aged 15 years, as if the grave he had just been weeping over had opened and offered up an impossible gift. Marcus felt his legs go weak. The world narrowed to a single point, a single face, a single impossible question that he was terrified to ask. "Who are you?" His voice came out as barely a whisper. Amara stopped 3 feet away from him. Her hand moved to the pendant around her neck, the small gold heart that she now knew had been a gift from the mother she could not remember. She unclasped it with trembling fingers and held it out toward him, letting it catch the morning light. "You gave this to me," she said, and her voice was steady, even as tears rolled down her cheeks. "On my 5th birthday. You told me it was shaped like a heart, because that's what I was, your heart, walking around outside your body." Marcus Whitfield's knees gave out completely. He collapsed onto the grass beside his daughter's grave, staring up at the young woman who was holding a piece of jewelry he had last seen on a 7-year-old girl 15 years ago. His mind was screaming that this was impossible, that he had identified her body, that he had buried her in this exact spot. But his heart knew something his mind could not accept. His heart recognized her the way the ocean recognizes the shore. "Zoe!" The name came out broken, shattered, a question and a prayer and a terrified hope, all wrapped in 2 syllables. She knelt down beside him, and when she took his hand, he felt something unlock in his chest that had been sealed shut for 15 years. "My name is Amara now," she said, "but I was born Zoe Lorraine Whitfield. I was in that car with Mom. I survived. And I've spent 6 months trying to find the courage to tell you that I'm still alive." What happened next would become the stuff of legend in Atlanta business circles, though the full details would never be made public. Marcus Whitfield's security team was sworn to secrecy, but even they could not fully contain the story of their employer breaking down completely in a cemetery, holding a young woman who was supposed to be dead, and refusing to let go for nearly an hour. When he was finally composed enough to speak, to ask the questions that 15 years of grief demanded answers to, Amara told him everything. She told him about Gloria, about the lies, about the cold house in North Carolina where she had grown up hungry for a love that was never offered. She told him about finding the folder, about the detective, about the months of investigation that had led her to this moment. And she told him about the fear that had almost kept her away. The terror that he might not want her after all this time. Marcus pulled back just far enough to look at her face, to trace the features that were so achingly familiar, to see his wife and his daughter and his own reflection all at once. "I have never stopped wanting you," he said, his voice raw,